dollars to do. Keep an updated website with your CV, because that's kind of also where things really took off, is because I, again, kept doing the work, but then I also kept visibility about the way I was doing my work. I think it was somebody else mentioned conferences, going to conferences. Joy, I think it was mentioned conferences. Go to conferences, make your work visible, make yourself visible. So last year, I only applied for one tenure track job just because the university contacted me and said, hey, could you apply for this job? And then the rest was postdocs. And even with the postdoc with Brown, the chair of the political science department emails me and was like, hey, I see your website. It looks like you got some stuff going on. Send me some of your work, and I want to see what it's like. So I send her the work, and then she brings in the chair of the education department. And we're really interested in your work. Can we do an interview? So they interview me. And then the next thing you know, they're like, look, we're gonna release the application in a few months for this postdoc. We want you to apply. So I applied for the postdoc, and then they bring me in, and now it's, they gave me their most prestigious postdoc. It's the presidential postdoc. This is, so you go from, everything falling down. And my first advisor, by the way, he passed away right before I graduated. Like a month before I filed my dissertation, he passed away. So, all these things kept happening, but the consistency and being able to do the work was the most important thing. And if you can instill that in the Mellon Fellows, like they did for us, at a very, very early stage, just to stay focused, keep your head down, get in the process of doing work. Don't worry about being glamorous, public intellectual, a lot of attention. Don't focus on any of that. That stuff comes. But it all starts with the work, because that's what they're going to look for, and that's what they really scrutinize you for. They don't think we can do it. They don't think we can do the work. They don't think we have the capacity to do it. Subconsciously, they don't. So it starts with your ability to stay focused and do the work.
I've been trying to figure out how to start this narrative. And I think first, I should reiterate what most of everyone has said, which is the universe coming together over some very difficult and challenging circumstances, which was definitely also true in my case. So I had moved back home to complete my dissertation because I needed to be around folks who cared about me. And I made that decision knowing that it might be suicidal. But I thought I was more important than being at the institution for job security. I'll say it that way. And so I wasn't sure about going on the job market at all. I had a committee who was sort of divided. Most of the committee thought I was ready, but there were people who thought I was not. And the committee member who really thought I was ready sent my materials to the job coach at the University of Virginia, and the job coach said she should definitely go on the market. I still wasn't convinced that I was ready, but I took it lightly, but also serious in preparation. So I was like, this might not work out for me, but I'm gonna prepare as if it might. And I looked at the job market as an opportunity to sort of have other thought partners looking at my work and responding to my work. And that made me feel excited in a new way, because for so long, I just had these few people and a couple of friends who were colleagues looking at it and criticizing it in very useful ways, but getting people who were really, really excited to engage with my work while I was on the market really strengthened my sense of myself as a scholar in ways that hadn't happened over a number of years, because I was sort of secluded from the university setting. And so some of the things that I think were very useful for me was sharing resources with people, for sure. Using those difficult advisors as people who you do mock interviews with. So I had several mock interviews with my advisors, and then also just other students who had been on the market before me. I leaned on people like Lisa. We were on the market together, and so that was very. We kind of just really supported each other, and I really appreciate that. We applied to some of the same jobs, and it was just sort of like not a competition. I just went here. These are the things they asked me. Be prepared for this, and so this is probably like the least helpful information, but yeah, I think the transition the decision to go on the market, thinking about it not just with your committee, but if you have like a job coach on your campus, it might be very useful to see, because sometimes we only are looking at our work and we're not necessarily seeing what other people are doing, and you might be ready before you even think you are, and then trusting that things will work out for you. And so I'm at a place where I kind of never would have imagined existed, because it's very suited for me and the kind of person that I am, and things that I value in terms of like teaching, research, but it's not the publish or perish model. And so trusting that those things exist despite all of the rumors around how brutal the job market can be, even though it can be, but just trusting that there's a position for you. And then also teaching is really important. Having that experience, I think, was really looked on favorably at different institutions.
I also just want to give like a huge shout out and a huge thanks to Dr. Shanna Benjamin, who's working over in the back. One thing that I've really appreciated are people who are just very transparent and don't hide things and tell you the real deal up front so that you can prepare for it. And Dr. Benjamin is like that in every regard. So when it came to negotiations, we had a negotiation workshop. She was just very instructive about like how this whole process works. And I think like when we're talking about that, this idea of confidence, like with the Tougaloo experience, this idea of like, you know how this institution is working, you know whose side of the line, like who's for you, who's against you, and how to be able to leverage that and use that for your advantage. So when I'm being on the job market, I definitely appreciate talking to those individuals who give you the real deal about what to expect.
So along the same lines, thinking about transparency, I think that this sort of transparency that we have represented here on the panel is actually pretty rare in most academic circles. But as I discussed with Kim last night, it's a testament to how much all of us would like to give back to the Mellon Network. So at this time, I'd like to invite you to ask any questions that you have of the panel, to engage the brain trust that we have sitting right here. And if there's, yes, Nzali.
Hello, my question. Hello, I'm Nzali Skills. I'm a junior sociology major, Spanish minor at Spelman College, currently a Mellon Mays Fellow. My question for you all is, what kept you going? Because I know the graduate experience is really long, which sounds long to me. It sounds super long. So I'm just like, what keeps you going? Like, okay, your work, but what kept your wheels turning in the moments that you were like, shoot, I don't know if I'm gonna make it. Like, I don't know if I'm gonna graduate on time or get it done. So what was your source of inspiration, if you had any?
I'll jump in really quickly because I'm like, okay, I had a coming to Jesus moment where I was like, why am I doing this again? Like, but two things. My commitment to UNCF Mellon kept me going. Seriously, it was. I would not have thought of a PhD, would not have gone to pursue it, would not have continued in my program if it wasn't for my commitment here and for all of you guys. So you undergraduates who are coming and all the other fellows. So it's a testament to this program. The other thing was just resilient. We are resilient people. Resiliency was, I mean, all the crap that I'm sure all of us, we could tell tales and be here all day long just about some stuff we had to put up with. So being resilient and building that resilience either in your faith and, you know, other people, like-minded people,
who will be there to support you. Many a days calling my mom, who told me this was nothing but a piece of paper, but understands it now. She understands it now. Who told me, don't be hasty. To wait it out. So it was so that kind of stuff was what helped me. Yeah.
Don't be hasty. Yeah, that's good.
Similar thing, real quick, just to add to that. Again, it's just the expectations, and it's harder to get out. It's hard to stay in, but it's also hard to get out because it becomes your identity. You do this for 3, 4, 5 years, and you're in a new community, and when you meet people, you introduce yourself. You're so-and-so, the PhD student, and that's how they know you. And that's how you know yourself. That's how you start to define yourself. Like, you go to this university every day, and all your colleagues are other graduate students. So it becomes kind of a part of who you are. So like, you find yourself in these moments, you're like, well, this sucks, and what do I really want to do? And you're like, well, this is kind of who I am right now. I mean, at this point, I've made this commitment. MMUF has made this investment in me. I've made this investment in myself. So at the end of the day, that it tends to outweigh the negative things that kind of get in your way. It's just you are who you are. I mean, you are transforming the academy because of you being there. So it starts with just this shift in identity that takes place for you to go about the process of transforming the academy.
Dr. Ward. And you can speak as we head over that way.
I think for me, my first semester in graduate school, my grandmother has passed away since, but I called her crying because my first paper, I believe, in historical theology at Yale, I stayed up until 3 o'clock in the morning writing it and reading and making sure I was proper and I was correct. And I received the lowest grade I'd ever received since I started school. And I had never stayed up so late at Tougaloo and received such a bad grade. And I've never had to stay up that late to receive a good grade from Tougaloo. I could stay up till midnight and it was good enough. I stayed up till 3 o'clock at Yale and I received a C or a D. And so for me, being committed to my goal and committed to the finish line helped sustain me amidst all the C's that turned into B's that eventually turned into A's throughout graduate school. And so imagining my life, the PhD, they're cool letters, but they're really the letters just suggest that you are committed to writing and contributing to a discussion that you feel passionate about. Wow. Yeah. And so the fact that was kind of cool. And so for me, knowing that Richard Wright, from Mississippi, has produced work and material that means so much that there needs to be books and secondary materials, and his name needs to be remembered, for me meant so much that I knew that required a PhD to produce that type of material. So just having the goal in mind and knowing that it is a real, actual goal that you can cross in spite of the bad things is what kept me.
Yes, I'd like to congratulate each of you for surviving the process and indeed changing or transforming the academy. But I would like to know from each of you if you now feel a need to transform your disciplines, including development work. I mean, so that's not outside of a discipline. That is a discipline, raising money.
Oh yeah.
I'm like, where do I begin with that to answer that question? I mean, education is a broken system. We often hear that, right? So I feel like it's a huge burden to try to change it, but certainly changing how I approach it could contribute to in some way changing the discipline. But oh gosh, yes. To answer your question, yeah, I do feel a burden. I feel a responsibility to change the discipline and to change the discourse around how we talk about certain issues, particularly that plagues communities of color. and doubly marginalized people groups. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think at least I can only speak for political science. I think it's very important to change the way that it's structured in terms of, one, how people of color who come into the field are really placed in boxes. You know, if you come in and you're a black scholar, and it's this weird thing where you either have to study black people, or you exclusively study black people, or like your scholarship can't be too black. Like you have to, the fields make you walk this tightrope. So I think it's not as bad for like our cohort, like our class, just because of the scholars who came before us and actually did this scholarship to really push back and say that black folks can do all types of scholarship, and black scholarship can be done a variety of different ways. But we still have a ways to go in terms of like really pushing that forward and just establishing more just autonomy in terms of like what we as black scholars can do or expected to do, because it's reflected in the job market too. You know, you're told which positions to apply for and which ones to not apply for, right? There's these kind of, there's a coded language around like, selections for these tenure track positions, what's viewed as diversity and what's not viewed as diversity. So, we still have a ways to go to really like make black scholarship really appreciated within, at least in political science, and make black scholars, period, more appreciated in the field. But it starts with this. This is where it starts. MMUF, this is really where it begins. But that's a great question, Dr. Ward.
See, the question is deep because it makes me think about, you over here, it makes me think about the generational clash that I experienced in the academy and that I'm experiencing now in corporate, specifically in diversity and inclusion. So on one hand, you may have an advisor who they finished grad school and then they got a tenure track position. So what does that mean? They advise you from that perspective without realizing that we are in a very uncertain marketplace. So then that requires that you advise me differently. Because to really thrive and survive in this marketplace, you need to have an amalgamation, that's my favorite word, of skills. I've said it twice now, of different skills to really survive. So that's not any different in the academy. Whether there was a young woman, I think it was you, speaking about the different subfields of sociology. You can't just know one subfield of sociology now to thrive and survive. You need to be well versed in many. And that's actually going to make your scholarship stronger. But that wasn't necessarily, for example, my advisor, and this is not knocking her, is a gender scholar. So when she advised me, she was advising from a purely feminist lens. That's not how I see the world. And more importantly, that's not how I read the literature. But I understand where she was coming from. So there was always this back and forth, and it's really a generational perspective there. Then, let's think about where I'm at now. I'm in corporate diversity inclusion strategizing. The irony there is that it's the millennials who are changing the definitions of diversity, whether it's diversity, inclusion, belonging, engagement, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But yet, the non-millennials are still the decision makers, and the millennials are the workhorses. And for example, myself, I'm coming in and I'm just flipping the table and saying, what you've done in the 80s and 90s, clearly it didn't move the needle. So I'm coming in and I'm trying to transform and do something differently. But see, when you talk freely and openly like that in corporate, ooh, it's tricky, and it's been tricky. But, that comes at a cost. Am I willing to take that? Sure, why not? Because I'm a millennial. I'm not going to be at the company for more than 2 or 3 years anyway. So I leave my mark, and I go and I do it somewhere else. And in that way, I'm going to have a bigger mark eventually. So to me, where I'm at, it's just a really big generational clash. And I saw it in the academy, and I see it in corporate diversity.
Thank you.
So thank you, and I just want to first of all just say how proud I am of every last one of you on this panel, and you're transforming the Academy in a variety of ways, Callista, and we're so happy that you're in the room where it happens. Right? It's very important to have you in the room where it happens at that level. So please, there's no guilt. You should just, disabuse yourself of that. But I guess I've been just kind of thinking about diversity and thinking about, we throw the term around all the time, and we know that these programs were in fact created to diversify the Academy. We're scholars transforming the Academy. That's who you are. But I often wonder, are you the diversity that the Academy said it was looking for? I mean, how do you feel? I mean, not feel, but what have been your experiences? The Academy says we want diversity, that we want young scholars of color. We want them in our graduate programs. We want them teaching on our campuses. Is it a totally welcoming environment? Do you think everybody got the memo that we want diversity within our institutions? I mean, what's that experience like? And you might not be able to elaborate on it, but it's something that I really have been toying with lately, and probably you'll hear more about this. But I really, now that we've got a critical mass out there, this building, and so is the Academy really ready for you? And so
Well, I'll kick it off with a bit of an anecdote. No. I had a unique experience last year that, harkening back to transparency, oftentimes we're actually not privy to these sorts of conversations that happen behind closed doors, if not for folks like Callista who will tell you, oh yeah, this is actually what happened in these deliberations. I had gotten to the final round of an interview process, done campus interviews. They went well. I thought that there was lots of good energy, and this was perhaps the mythical good fit. But what I ended up finding out was that I was not the right type of diversity, or the diversity that the college needed at the time, that the institution needed at the time. And the person who ended up being hired for that position was Latino, specifically studying a Hispanic topic. And so even though I am a Caribbeanist, it just wasn't the right optics for their situation. And something that experience taught me was how to take that sort of maneuvering around fit in stride. But yes and no. I mean, we are that diversity, but are they ready? Perhaps not. Jonathan?
I would definitely agree. I mean, I think it's so subjectively defined, and it's going to vary from campus to campus, department to department. And I think, our diversity is only as valuable as the people in the decision-making positions see it. So that's why it's great. It's important that not only do you bring in newly minted PhDs, but you bring in faculty who are at various institutions, who, deans of colleges and universities are here in this room. I mean, having people who have access to decision-making tables ensures that our diversity is still valued, because it's very idiosyncratic. I mean, I think it really varies. If someone is pressuring, a department to make sure that our type of diversity is valued, it will be. And if it's not, I don't think it will. But, I'm at the bottom of the totem pole, so I don't know if that's accurate, but that's kind of my assessment from what I've seen so far.
Kind of just take a stab at that. So I'm currently at WashU, and one of the interesting things, ever since Ferguson happened, the university has been in this kind of transition, and the students have actively kind of like protested the administration. And one of the things the administration has been doing is, while they saw themselves as diverse, so there were plenty of brown bodies and seats, right? They didn't span the gamut of class. Like, they weren't diverse in terms of class. So even the students that I teach come from a particular background, even if they may be of color, right? Like they were in Jack and Jill, they went to private school, and so they have this certain acclimation to the world and that kind of like orients how they kind of like have their experience at WashU. So when I think about diversity, one of the things that's most important for me is this idea of understanding like the class background, and also kind of to get to Dr. Ward's question about, do you think you need to kind of like transform your discipline in a way? Even while I was on the job search last year, one of the things that kept coming up in my mind for some of the like English departments was, I would not want to be here. Like it was something about that department that I knew, even from the website or even from talking to people, like it's very traditionalist, it's very conservative, and the mode and the frameworks that I use may be seen as resistant or like too radical in approach. And so I think I think for me, there is this willingness to kind of like make these interventions, even if it's in the form of the students who ultimately become majors in that department, to be able to think about this space in a much more broader and transformative sense. And so for me, it does begin at the classroom, the pedagogical level. And so I just kind of like wanted to answer both of those questions about diversity and also transforming our disciplines.
I believe we have time for one more question.
I'd try to be quick. Thinking back to my own experience as an undergraduate, I went to a school that had been all male until just few years before I got there. And I remember thinking that I was pleased with the fact that I was transforming that academy simply by being there. I was wrong. And one of the things, you know, it's now an institution which has plenty of women, but it has not shifted more than a couple notches on the dial of changing its values and its traditions and its beliefs. And so there's diversity of skin color, and that's kind of one step, and there's diversity of experience, which gets into a whole other mix. There's diversity of scholarship. But diversity of values, we're hearing a lot about coming into and negotiating an environment which is what you might call values-free intellectualism. At what point can the people here, in what ways can you shift the values needle of the predominantly white American academy to the point where those struggles change their shape or stop posing such barriers to people who value collegiality and community over competition and ego?
I think that question and the prior question are connected in a way. I don't think the Academy desires diversity. I think they desire to not get knocked for not having diversity. And so oftentimes, they desire themselves in black flesh. And to answer your question, Dr. Gagne, I don't know how to change that. All I can do is what Dr. Collins said, is put my face down and do my work, because I can't necessarily make myself in charge of altering the values of the white academy. And I just have to hope or pray or wish that their values would change on their own in their engagement and process with me, because to do that is too heavy a burden. And I wouldn't get any work done.
But you represent your values in that space.
Yes.
So at this time, I'd like to once again thank all of our panelists. And certainly thank all of you for participating. I'd like to welcome Dr. Spence at this time for a special presentation.
Again, let's just give this panel a round of applause. And so we're just so pleased that you are representing us in the ways that you are. And we know that each of you is committed to the transformation of the Academy. And so have no doubt that we are proud of the directions that you are following. And we'll continue to be here to lift you up. We will always be your cheerleaders, and please know that. And so what we do, we have a practice of whenever someone receives their PhD, there's a gift that we provide to you. So no matter where you are, we want you to have this paperweight, and I'll just read Jonathan's off, and so I won't have to read off each one, but each individual will receive Dr. Jonathan Collins, UNCF Mellon Scholar. And so you keep that with you. Dr. Joy Hightower. Thank you. Dr. Kimberly Love. Dr. Jamal Calloway. Dr. Calista Kelly. And you know what we want you to have, place this somewhere on your desk. So on those days when you're having doubts, we just want you to reach out and put your hand on your paperweight and know that you got a whole community behind you. And last but not least, Dr. Lisa Young. Lauren has already received her paperweight. But we want to thank Dr. Lauren Eldridge for managing this panel. So we're getting ready to go into the breakout sessions, and there are 4 different ones. In the Woodruff Room, where we just had our lunch, there'll be a roundtable discussion focusing in on new directions in gender and sexuality studies. In this room, those of you who are interested can remain. There will be a discussion on new directions in the humanities, digital, and interdisciplinary theory and praxis. In the Ansley Room, which is upstairs, this may be of particular interest to our young scholars throughout the audience. New directions in scholarly publishing. Don Durante, who's the senior acquisitions editor for the African American Studies, Women's, Gender, and Sexuality Studies, American Studies, and Religion at the University of Illinois Press. And then the last breakout will be in the Peachtree Room, which is also upstairs. Wiley College, Dr. Bernadette Brewster, who is the Dean of Social Sciences and Humanities, will be doing a workshop on teaching and learning and mentoring 21st century students. The roundtables will run from 3 to 4:15, and then once we finish, we hope that each room would have a recorder. And so when you finish up, if you come back down here, we just want to have a quick feedback section just to let us know what were some of the key points that you learned. And then we'll break for a happy hour, and then you have dinner on your own. So we really want to also thank you all for your attentiveness. You know, there's so much to cover and so much to celebrate. And so you're in these rooms all day long, but we try to schedule the sessions in such a way that we can keep your interest going. And so certainly this is one of the highlights of our conference each year when we celebrate our PhDs, because that's why we do this work. And so we're just so happy that they were able to place us on their schedule, because they're all newly minted. And but we also want to thank you all for your mentorship of these students, but of all the students that you're mentoring. And we hope that you will take advantage of the roundtable discussions, because again, as we said yesterday, our goal is to strengthen faculty, to strengthen curriculum, because we know when we do that, we strengthen our institutions. So we hope that you'll take advantage of the roundtables. Thank you.
I am Jacqueline Jones Royster. I'm the Dean of the Ivan Allen College of Liberal Arts at Georgia Tech, and I'm pleased to welcome you to the session that is called New Directions in the Humanities, Digital and Interdisciplinary Theory and Practice. Paradigm for contemporary research, teaching, and learning in the humanities is shifting in many ways, but the shift that we will focus on in today's conversation is on the growing use of digital tools. Scholars are collecting data, quantitative and qualitative, textual and contextual, across actors, events, time and space, organizing and calibrating these sets of data sets from different points of view to leverage insights. Digital tools are helping us to gather, preserve, sort, and catalog information, to create searchable archives, identify dynamic pathways through them, and create tracking, mapping systems as heuristics for interpretation and knowledge making. We are also using computer-mediated designs and digital platforms to present the knowledge and viewpoints that emerge multimodally and interactively. Such work seems especially useful for developing new modes of scholarly travel through large and complex sets of information, and we are making new methodological strides in which digital resources can impact knowledge production and processing. The increasing availability of digital tools and resources is reshaping our methodological habits, shifting the ways by which we access and identify textual and contextual data, create interpretive paradigms, and hold, manage, map, and manipulate data and evidence in ever more nimble and interactive ways. These shifting habits suggest that we should not forget the need for metacognitive vigilance about our ways of working, not just in terms of quality control, but also in terms of the impacts and consequences of our tools and habits on the knowledge-making enterprises themselves. Questions emerge such as, how do our manipulations and management mechanisms, digitally inspired operational strategies function in theory formation and interpretive outcomes? What work do digital humanities methods enable or enhance within our analytical and interpretive paradigms? How can such tools help us to understand the social networks within which our practices emerge, function, circulate, and migrate? How does mapping help us sort through the massive information made available through digital tools? How do we represent this evidence more interactively? How does this digitally enhanced capacity help us to see and understand more? What are the values added, and what are the cautionary tales? So today, 4 of us, and the 4th one is stuck in traffic and will be here shortly, will share, the 4 of us will share some things from the work that we are doing, and I emphasize quite differently in this area. I will start by saying that I am in rhetorical studies and spent a good bit of my time looking at the rhetorical practices of 19th century African American women and the ways that they used their rhetorical expertise to engage in various social justice agenda. I don't want to say too much more about the specifics of this work, but I do want to show just 3 maps. I like the maps, so it's the visualization part that has drawn me to the use of digital tools. And I hope that they tweak your interest about this subject matter and the imagination that you might bring to it. So I have pulled out some maps from my work on Ida B. Wells as a 19th century, 20th century journalist. And what I'm sharing with you today is just how I have come to understand her in particular ways. Now, one of the things that I think we don't give enough credit to Ida Wells for is how she even got started. And a map that helped me see the impact of context on her life is that in 1978, 3 of her family members, her mother and father and younger brother, her immediate family, her uncle in Memphis, were wiped out by the yellow fever epidemic. And so when you map that epidemic right along the Mississippi River, you see that it caused havoc in the lives